Welcome to the Pay Love Forward podcast. My name is Dr. Matthew Leavenworth, founder and director of Pay Love Forward. This series shares the stories of our quiet builders of compassion, those who choose to lead with courageous authenticity. At Pay Love Forward, our mission is to build compassionate communities for the at-risk and underserved through mentorship. This podcast is one way we live out that mission. Pay Love Forward is partnered with the Center for Mentoring, Coaching, and Leadership Development, an organization dedicated to helping leaders become better versions of themselves and more effective leaders in their spheres of influence. Together, we're committed to hearing the story within the story, the deeper narrative of resilience and redemption that connects us all. Today, I sat down with one of my mentors and one of the founding builders of the program I benefited so much from. Dr. Mark Manzanares was one of the founders of atAdams State's online counselor education program, where I received both my master's and PhD. Mark also received 2 degrees from atAdams State, both as a football player during his undergraduate degree in psychology and then in his master's degree in community counseling. He was hired on to atAdams State counseling program while completing his PhD in education and human resources studies at Colorado State University. Dr. Mark Manzanares continues to teach counselor education at atAdams State University and is a former chair of the counselor education department. He spent decades as a counselor, educator, administrator, and mentor, helping train generations of counselors throughout the Rocky Mountain region. He was my professor through multiple stages of my education and mentored me while working on my PhD at atAdams State as I wrestled with a traumatic brain injury and my son's diagnosis of first Down syndrome and then leukemia. Without his guidance, I would not be where I am today. Dr. Manzanares has been recognized by atAdams State as an outstanding alumni and recipient of the Presidential Teaching Award. It was an honor to sit down with him, reflect on the profession, and discuss the people, ideas, and experiences that have shaped so many counselors over the years. It was an honor to hear his story, learn about the adversity he overcame, and the why behind what he has dedicated his life to building. This conversation is also a continuation of the series on faith and the Holy Spirit, and how our shared belief in Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior is the driving force behind both of our lives, careers, and ministries. Thank you, Mark, for everything you've done in my life, for believing in me, and for being a guardian at the gate of the sacred profession of mental health counseling. The world needs better stories, and Pay Love Forward intends to tell them. Okay. In 3, 2, 1.
Recording in progress.
All right, Mark, we're live. Well, super excited to have this conversation, Mark, with you. And just to kind of give a little bit of a background, so I completed both my master's and my PhD at atAdams State University. And you were the president, the director. What was your...
The chair.
The chair?
At the time it was department chair.
And really one of the founders of atAdams State, and especially like the online program and the counseling program that now, I mean, they train about 1,000 a year. Is that accurate?
Yeah, just under 1,000 students.
And so I was one of them for a real long time. And, you know, I mean, I can remember back in my master's program, I don't think I ever had you as a professor, but just, you know, you had a bit of a presence. Like we all knew who the man was. And, you know, it was you and who, give me the names of the kind of founding crew.
Well, yeah, so it was actually Don Bass.
Don Bass, yeah.
Susan Varhaley was a department chair.
Mm-hmm.
Rex Filer was a faculty member at that time. Terry McCartney was another faculty member, and then myself, and Teresa O'Halloran. That was our core group.
Mm-hmm.
That was here at the time that we went from a campus program to a online program. The campus program actually started. It was actually prior to 1985, but Don Bass got here in 1985, and
I was born in 1985.
Program. What's that?
I was born in 1985.
So in 1985, they brought him in here, and he was the department chair of psychology and counselor ed. Very, pretty small program. Our big piece was we were a campus program that had a program here in Alamosa, one in Grand Junction, Colorado, one in Durango, Colorado, one in Pueblo, Colorado, and then every now and again we had one in Canyon City, and had one in La Junta, Colorado. Mm-hmm. And we ran it that way for years. We would go up on Tuesdays or Thursdays or weekends, and we would teach. If it was on Tuesday, Thursdays, we'd teach weekly, 3 hours. If it was on the weekend, we'd go up a Friday and Saturday, all day Saturday, and then come back. And then in 2000. 2004, we started to entertain the online program and went live with the online program in 2005.
Which is so interesting too, because that sort of nestles into not only the history of counseling as a field, coming from Freud and Jung and Adler, but like even just the advent of the internet, right? Like, which is
Yeah.
the 1990s is when we saw that explosion and online education became possible. So you truly, Adams State was situated in that, in that progression, in that evolution of the field, and then how it's responded to the age of technology. Well, specifically though, and this particular episode is part of kind of a series where exploring a couple things and thinking about doing a couple of different series. One on faith, and just our belief systems and what they mean to us, how they shape our identity, how they define who we are, what it means to be a follower of Christ. And then the other one, I would love to do a series on higher education because it's been such a huge part of my life. And I loved this, reaching out to you in particular because I think you fall at kind of a crossroads between both of those. But also because I did have you as a professor in my PhD program on a number of occasions, and you're just one of my favorite professors. I mean, hands down, and I learned so much from you. And I see you as a mentor, as somebody I truly look up to, and value. And also there was a moment in my trajectory too where things were just getting real bleak. And I had what was later diagnosed as a traumatic brain injury. I was losing my vision. I was just sick all the time. And I think that was not when my son got diagnosed. I think it was before that. It was kind of when he was, when we found out he had Down syndrome, and, that, I just like stuff was just getting bleak. And I'd reached out to you and just had a conversation with you. And, we talked for an hour or so, and you told me not to pay attention to the congregation of assholes. Is that the?
I call it the board of assholes.
The board of assholes. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. That speak doubt and hopelessness into your ears. And they were pretty loud at that point in time, but you shared a number of stories, with me. And it was one of the conversations that kept me on the road that I remained on and was eventually able to complete the program. And you were a mentor through that whole period of time. And that's the cool thing about mentorship, because I've got tons of mentees, and oftentimes I only hear from them once every 3 months when things are blowing up, and they need to reach out to somebody who can help them stabilize their world. And so you were one of those stabilizing forces for me, and also just have a profound appreciation for your contributions to the field of counseling, it is just a healing force. And now we, Adams State, which, I taught at Adams State, and learned under you, and many of those names that you talked about, those were also my heroes and mentors and people who helped shape me into whatever I am now, for better or for worse. But there's so much healing and so much goodness that comes out of Adams State. And so, and then the last thing so we started this conversation before we started recording, and I've already done one of the episodes about faith, and specifically about the Holy Spirit and about miracles, and got to meet with these folks from Grey Cliff Mill. They're both pastors out there, and they described miraculous events. And one of them is a little boy who drowned, and then literally they prayed over him. He was clinically dead for about 15 minutes and came back to life and is running around Grey Cliff Mill with no brain damage. I mean, he's a happy, beautiful little boy. And these are incredibly earnest, honest, wonderful people, and these are their stories. And I'm also the benefactor of what could be described as a miracle. It's certainly in some respects is a miracle. My son Gentry had leukemia twice. At multiple times in his life, he was given about a 0% chance of making it to the other side, and somehow we're here. And that was the byproduct of brilliant doctors, but also he had an army of people praying for him. And so when we started this conversation, you shared a story of something that fits into that terrain, and maybe we could start there and just start there.
Okay. Yeah. So, when we first got on, I just wanted to share a story with you. You're probably, you're the only one literally outside of the circle of my family that I've really felt I wanted to share this with, because I know what you went through. I know, you were at Children's Hospital, you wrote your dissertation at Children's Hospital, and, you did your best to balance your family, your school, and your health, and you were able to accomplish in a lot of ways some and always amazing what is the result of your son, the result of you getting your dissertation, and the result of the strength of your family. I mean, it just all came in because of your belief system. So I wanted to share, my story. It's not even mine. It's not mine to hold. It's just more of, it was something that's going on in our family that, was very powerful. And I thought it was fitting to let what that was like, but also to share with you that we were at Children's Hospital, and things have worked out. But my daughter is expecting here in June 29th. It was supposed to be July 6th. It's kind of a hallmark day because that was the day my stepmom was born, and my nephew was born on that day. So it was almost like this excitement of, wow, we might have another one. But you know how expectancies are. They come when they choose to, not when, that's why we call them expectancies, not expectations. Because if we have an expectation, it's going to come on the 6th, and our expectancy is it comes when it comes. But in the process, my daughter had an OBGYN up in Colorado Springs, and which is about 70 miles away from where they live. So they were driving up there for their monthly checkups, and everything was going to be going just fine. And then through an ultrasound, they found some issues with the baby, and so they immediately moved my daughter and the baby up to Children's Health, where they were going to be able to get treated by a team. And my conversation with you is just how amazing Children's Health is, or Children's Hospital, not Children's Health. Children's Hospital is just an absolute amazing facility. The doctors are amazing. The atmosphere is amazing, and in a time where things aren't amazing for a lot of parents and a lot of people. It was amazing in terms of what they do to try to care for these families in this time of need. And so, through that process, one of the things that my daughter was going to have was an MRI. And of course, as a young mom, first time, she's a little, she's really scared. And I, with my faith, I do, I believe that, that God sends down guardian angels, has guardian angels for you. When my mom passed away, I truly believe, as much as, my mom was kind of guarding over me, even though I have a guardian angel. When my children were born, they became a guardian angel to my children, almost to a point where we have this belief that if you see 11:11 on the clock, that means somebody's thinking of you. Somebody who has gone and passed is thinking of you. So Matt, next time you see 11:11 on the clock and you just happen to glance, somebody's thinking of you. So the first person that comes to your mind is the person that was saying hello. And so, our whole lives, we've always kind of believed in that, and obviously believe in the power of God and the power of Jesus Christ. But she was in a really, really scared position, going to get in this ultrasound. And, in our prayer, my wife was praying, my younger daughter was praying, we were praying, and I said, God, please send your guardian angels to help, be there. And I said, and my dad passed away in November 24. And as much as my daughters, I feel was going to be the guardian angel to my daughters, my dad, I said, Dad, could you be there to really get there and help Lucas? And I said, Mom, could you and God hold the hand of Marissa while she's going in this MRI? And I hadn't really ever said anything to Marissa until I said, she got out of the MRI and she says, Dad, all of a sudden I felt a calm, and I felt like something was holding my hand as I went in there. And so she was able to do the MRI. Long story short, I told her, I said, it was probably pretty crowded in that room because you had God in there. You had all these saints. We're Catholic, so, we were looking at the saints. I said, you had St. Jude, St. Anthony, you had your grandma and your grandpa, you had all these people. It was probably pretty crowded in there,
Pretty crowded.
along with these doctors. And they were all on your side. And Long story short, when they got the results, they started to notice that what was happening had stabilized. And then the next week, they started going week to week. The next week, they were continuing to stabilize, and then all of a sudden, they just started going backwards. They started going the opposite of going from
Mm.
critical, going back to the normal stage. Um, and and it was just, to the point where um, one of the last visits, the doctor said, "I'm sorry, Marissa, that's her name. I'm sorry, Marissa, but you have a very boring pregnancy now."
Mm.
Uh, because they're focused on this high intense, support of special needs, and all of a sudden everything went literally from what was critical literally back to normal.
Mm.
Because when they first started, it was at the highest of the critical, where we were preparing for a lot of different things after birth, of taking care of Lucas. This is going to be his name. Back to you're at a normal expectancy, and that's where we're at. However, Matt, the biggest piece that happened here, and again, there's a purpose for everything with them going to the UC, with going to Denver's hospital or Children's Hospital. In that process, we were well. Let me go back. In During this time, my brother and my sister, we lost my mom over 40 years ago, and when we were children, I was 8 years old. It was 42 years ago that we, lost my mom. No, it was 52 years ago. I'm sorry, I'm getting it off. 52 years ago, we lost my mom.
Mm.
And all we ever heard from people was she went to the dentist, had a root canal, she got hepatitis, and she died.
Mm.
So as you grow up, you start to think about, well, hepatitis is from dirty instruments. She got something dirty. Why didn't dad ever sue? Well, when dad passed away, I was going through his stuff, and I started to notice that I really started to notice that as I was pulling his paperwork and going through it, I first found a note from the lawyer that said, "Hey, there's nothing here, Mr. Manzanares. We're not going to pursue this lawsuit." So
Mm.
apparently my dad
You looked
did,
into it. Yeah.
but they didn't find anything. And I started to wonder, why wouldn't you find anything? If somebody had hepatitis, going to a dentist office, you should not get hepatitis. Then we started to find, I found all these other things except a death certificate. And my sister, when she was noticing I was going through things, she go, "Did you find mom's death certificate?" And I said, "No, I found everything but." And she says, "Well, I think I'm going to order it." So she ordered the death certificate for my mom. And it came back. Let me see if I can. It came back. Um, it came back and said her cause of death was a disseminated intravascular coagulation, called DIC,
Mm-hmm.
which could have been a result of factor 11, what they showed that she had factor 11. And factor 11 is a rare blood disorder that is fairly rare, but it's fairly common here in the San Luis Valley. That goes back historically, genealogy-wise, to the Sephardic Jews leaving Spain and coming here
Mm.
during the Inquisitions. And so, they immediately, when I saw this, I had an episode where I ended up in the emergency department a year ago after I had a nasal surgery, went over the pass, and they couldn't stop my bleeding. And I ended up in the emergency department almost to a point where they said if they couldn't stop it, I might have to have a transfusion over a simple nose,
Mm-hmm.
thing. And so we immediately told my daughter. My daughter immediately told Children's Hospital, and they immediately, because you're in this high place of well qualified people, said, "Whoa, wait a minute." They got a
Mm-hmm.
hematologist involved, they got a geneticist involved, and they started to say, "Okay, there is something. Okay, Lucas, he's fine. He's back to normal. We're worried about you now,
Mm.
Marissa." And they started doing tests on her, which they found out that she has factor 11. They also found out that she has this factor 8 issue. And now we may have not have ever known that if we would have stayed at the one hospital.
Mm.
But because we weren't here, one led to the other, which led to the other, and here we are right now. So when we talk about this, but going back to this incredible thing was we were prepared to be looking at a child with some
Severe special
possibly
needs. Yeah.
severe special needs to a point where we have a normal child with a normal expectancy.
Well, and how you were describing it earlier too, like the doctors weren't able to explain why the condition that he was suffering from just receded, like it
No,
just started
they
to.
they couldn't. They couldn't.
Mhm.
They were saying we don't know how this is happening. We've never seen this before. We're going to be doing some more testing to kind of figure out what's going on. Everything was just we don't, we've never seen this. It
Mm.
went from something that was happening would continue to progress to literally stopping, stabilizing, and going back to a normal.
Well, I'm so happy for you. I mean, that's the first thing, but also it just touches on this question that I think that I'm hoping to ask and explore, and I don't know the answer to the question, like most good questions, right? Which is, what is God doing? Like, what is God? How does He work through us? I mean, I think that's one of the insistences in the Bible and in especially the Gospels, that He is a physical instantiation of this spirit of healing and redemption. And he lives that out, and it's expressed in feeding the disciples. It's expressed in washing their feet. It's a physical manifestation. It's not an abstract. And so I think the theory is that that's still operational within us and through us and in between us. And in my case, where it's 2 years of just brutal treatment in a hospital, but somehow my son is still here, and my son is a healing force. I mean, he is a force in the world. And then these other instances where maybe it's very miraculous. I like this kid. Nobody there that they described did CPR, knew how to do CPR. It just shouldn't have turned out that way. And so at face value looks very, very miraculous. And then there's a lot of this in between stuff where it's like the medical profession and the scientists, and we're doing good medicine and we're exploring things and getting information. But also there's a healing force that transcends what it is that we understand, and even what it is the doctors understand. And that's really beautiful and really mysterious.
Yeah. Yeah, what you asked, why is he here? He's here because you're here. You're here doing this. You're spreading this word. And it doesn't necessarily have to be this word of, just, scripture and gospel. The word is the greatness of it. The word is you have a child that has been given to you, that's full of love and is giving you and your wife and your family complete love. And what I know of him is he just brings so much joy. And and through this story and through this passage and through this journey, he has created this opportunity for you to go out there and say, this has happened. It creates the opportunity for me to say, this has happened. Whatever you come to believe and how you believe, it's just take the risk to open yourself up to what we call God winks. When something happens that you feel like God is thinking of you, that there's a wink that He's there in that presence, and
11:11, right?
that's what I look at.
Yeah, 11:11, right? It's a
Eleven
wink,
eleven.
but you have to
Yeah.
open, because it's either superstition or maybe it's not, right? Like, but if you
Well,
open yourself up to it, it can be a current and a life force that can lead us towards something like redemption. I mean, I just think it
yeah.
like, we lost a niece in my family, and her name is Everly. My daughter's middle name is Everly, and every time we see a butterfly, we're reminded of the spirit of Everly. And
There,
I don't know
yes.
if the spirit of Everly is contained inside those butterflies, but there's something in the cosmos that calls to us to make meaning out of, what otherwise would just be despair.
Yes, you hit it right on the head. It is in there. It's in that dragonfly. It's in that butterfly.
Hmm.
It's in that place, because that's the thought you get that comes up every time you see that butterfly. She becomes alive again in you. And my daughter's the same way. My younger daughter, butterflies will fly around her. She's had butterflies land on her finger, and it's my mom. Her guardian angel will come in and say, "Hey, it's time for you to think about me." So, however, the vehicle is the memory of that you're
Hmm.
coming up 11:11, or it's this. I don't know, and again, traditionalists can sit there and say, "No, you shouldn't be doing that. That's wrong. That's not what it is." But God has that omnipresence. That God is that one that's going to be doing the power of this to be able to provide the opportunity for, a guardian angel to be there for you.
Hmm.
Um, you know, and that's what you have to look at. I years ago, you want to go back to other kinds of, miracles, or not want to call them miracles, but my younger daughter, when she was, when my wife was expecting, they thought she was going to be special needs. They thought she was going to be Downs. And we tested on one of these tests that all the markers went up high, and the only way they could determine that is through an amniocentesis. And so I remember on the trip, I was listening to a book. I don't often have time to read, and so I'll put a book on tapes, or I'll listen while I'm driving. And at that time I was doing the book Conversations with God by Neil Donald Walsh. And again, people can sit there and say, well, you should be doing this, you should be in the Bible, you should be all this. But what it is, it's a message, whether Tim Tebow is making touchdowns and bringing up awareness of God and spirituality and what you need to do and being good and taking care of others, to a book, that's what's important. If you've ever listened to the book or read the book Conversations with God, it's Neil Donald Walsh in his lowest of lows was asking God questions and was getting these answers.
Mm.
And one of his questions is, why don't you send more teachers? Why did you stop sending them?
Mm.
And God's response was, I send them all the time.
Mm.
You just kill them. People just, they persecute them every time we send them. And so, your son is a teacher,
Mm.
is teaching, has taught you so much about who you are and who you should be, and what is good in this world. My younger daughter, who is just absolutely of spirit to spirit, spiritual, worked for Regis Jesuit, doesn't ever want to leave a Jesuit school, has taught me things that could never even imagine, just because of her connection. Those are teachers. We're always waiting for this beam of light and some kind of teacher to come down, but the message that you're getting is what the teacher is teaching, and that's what you look at. So,
Thank you for saying that. Yeah, it's pretty emotional just hearing that, because that's one of my core beliefs about my son, is that he's a teacher.
he is, and he's taught you so much, and he's
So many
this
others too.
podcast. Yeah, this podcast here is him.
Mm.
You know, it gave you the strength and the power to do this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and maybe those teachers are there. Maybe there's a lot more of them, and we just need to get better at paying attention. And so that it truly is one of. And you're right. This is the podcast. This is it. Many of the things I do are carrying mechanisms or vehicles for me to tell this story that I personally feel like God gave me and asked me to tell.
Yeah, it is. Another thing in that book, Neil Donald Walsh asked God, why don't you send me messages? Why don't you talk to me? And he goes, I do. You just don't listen. And that's very profound, because we get a lot of messages in our world and we just tend not to listen to them, or they don't meet our control needs. And so we just dismiss them. I have this joke with my girls the whole time they were growing up, and they actually use it now. So I know they listen. They listen now. But there used to be a joke out there, and it wasn't even a joke. It was kind of a story, and it was a story where this man was in this house, and all of a sudden, it started raining. And when it started raining really hard, somebody came to the door, knocked on the door, and said, "Hey, you need to get out. It's going to flood." And he goes, "No, no, no. The Lord will take care of me. I'm going to stay here. He's going to be there for me." And then, the rain started getting up a little higher. And then all of a sudden, somebody knocks on the door and the water's up to his neck, and he's in a boat. And the guy says, "Hey, you need to get in the boat. We got to get going. Something's going to you're going to die." And he goes, "No, no, no. The Lord's going to take care of me. I'm going to be here." All of a sudden, now it's up to the top of the house. The guy's sitting on the house, and a helicopter comes by and
Yeah.
says, "You need to jump in the helicopter." You've heard the story of it,
Yep.
you need to jump in the helicopter. We got to go. And he goes, "No, no, God will take care of me." And he ends up dying because he drowned and he never got in. And he goes to heaven. He goes, "God, I thought you would take care of me." And he goes, "Well, heck, I
That's
send you
such
a man, a boat, and a helicopter. What else did you want?" And that's what that message that is about Neil Donald Walsh.
mm,
God's talking to us all the time.
yeah.
We just choose not to listen.
Hmm. And so true of that intersection between us as the vehicle that God works through, and then also that God is just working. And
Yeah.
and there's a slight paradox somewhere in there that's difficult to tease out. Well, Mark, I mean, one of the other reasons for this podcast is to find people I admire, look up to, and have influenced me, and hear their stories, what helped them through. And I know enough about your upbringing to know. I mean, you lost your mom early on. I know you were a boxer. You experienced quite a bit of adversity, and that led you, whatever it was, that trajectory, that story led you to a place where, I mean, truly part of your legacy, Mark, is that tens of thousands of counselors are out there in counseling offices caring for people and caring for people well. And I would put my education at Adams State up against any other, program in the nation. I got a really good education. We were trained well. We came out effective counselors. And that's the byproduct of the program that you were instrumental in building. And so that's part of your legacy. But I would love to hear the story of how you got from, losing your mom at 8 years old and, to growing up in a pretty tough neighborhood, from what I recall, to there. And you can tell that story in any way that you would like to, but I would love to hear that story.
Sure, sure. It actually even goes back before that. It goes back to my dad. And my dad grew up, when we talk about the rough neighborhood, and I grew up in a small mining town.
Mm.
It was, we talk about generational culture and generational trauma. But my dad grew up during a time of he started boxing because he was getting beat up every day. It was during the 30s and 40s, more during the 40s, and he there's a small community here called San Luis, and here in the San Luis Valley, and it's a small Hispanic community that literally ties back to Spain. And he left there at 5 years old. His dad went to go work on the railroad in Rawlins, Wyoming, which is not a very diverse place. One of the first things that they did is they changed all the kids' names to non-Hispanic names. My dad's name was Celestino. They called him Tino. My Aunt Bertha was Albertina. They called her Bertha. They all got different names. They weren't allowed to speak English. And then they were beat up almost daily. And my dad they called it the Sugar Creek. Back then, the sewer systems were exposed. And these kids, they'd wait for him after school, beat him up, and throw him in the Sugar Creek. And so there was a man there. His name was Bob Adams, and I encourage everybody to Google Bob Adams in Rawlins, Wyoming, and you're going to find a person who he was a restaurant owner and a mine, explorer, and he found the biggest deposit of uranium in Wyoming, the state of Wyoming, and became a multimillionaire. But from the time that my dad was very young, he kind of took my dad and the family under his wing, and just they all worked in his restaurant. My dad talks about the story about one day he got fired from working at Bob Adams' restaurant because he was young. He was a little dishwasher, and he had put blueberries in the pancakes, and somehow they got out to one of the customers, and the customers loved them. And he's like, "Who put blueberries in these pancakes?" And my dad said it was me. And he goes, "You shouldn't be doing that." And they got in an argument. And he goes, "Well, I quit." And he goes, "You're fired." And so my dad's were walking down the road, and Bob Adams pulls up in his Cadillac, and we're talking the '50s Cadillac. And he goes, "Kid, get in the back of my car." And he goes, "Are you going to apologize to me?" And Bob Adams goes, "Sorry, now get in the back of the car." I mean, here's this white man that just took in this young kid, and he didn't want him to be getting beat up anymore, so he got him into boxing. And then my dad was good enough in boxing, and it's kind of funny, Matt. My dad used to tell me this story. And he didn't embellish it. He just said when he was in high school, the football coach, my dad had just won the Golden Gloves, came back to school on a Monday, and the coach said, "You think you're pretty hot shot? Well, today's PE classes, you're going to box each one of these people here, everybody in class. You're going to box." And he said he boxed every single one of them, and he knocked out several of them. And that was the end of that story. Well, after my dad died, my Aunt Bertha, who was the closest in age, they went to school together. And she told me the real story of, so that was all true. But she said that he goes, that coach made him fight every single one of those kids. And he goes, by the time your dad was done, he was exhausted. I mean, he could barely even lift his arms, but he wouldn't let it down. He just kept putting the next person in there. And the story goes that he beat every single one of them. And so so those are the things that I admired about him. When he went to the Olympic trials up in Madison Square Garden, even he sparred Cassius Clay, which is Muhammad Ali. They were different weight classes, so they weren't at the same, but they sparred against each other. But he had told me the stories about they were the headliners of Madison Square Garden boxing, but yet they didn't get a hotel room. They had to walk through the kitchens. They had to be put in their rooms where they took a conference room, when you go to a conference, those big old conference rooms, and they just put a bunch of army cots in there. And that's where the boxers with color had to stay. So they all stayed in that kind of atmosphere. They couldn't, but yet they were the headliners. So those are the stories I grew up with. And so when I was old enough, Dad got me into boxing. It was kind of interesting because it was a tough time. There were a lot of what we'd call cholos that were almost all the cholos were boxing. And then here I was in that boxing arena with them. And I'm skipping a lot, just for time, but I boxed for a number of years. I don't want to say it was like 10 years or anything like that, but I boxed from the time I could barely hold the gloves up. I think I was in about second or third grade, all the way until right at junior high. And the reason I did, what changed that was my dad one day, I wanted to play football. So I started playing football. And so I was playing football and I was boxing. And at some point, my dad, and I'm sure it was my mom, it was my birth mom, I'm sure she, did not like me boxing. I know she didn't. She never went to one of my boxing matches because she didn't want to see me getting beat up. But I'm sure she pulled him aside and she says, he needs to do one or the other. But what ended up happening is Dad came up to me and he said, "Mark, I need you to decide. I only want you in one brain altering sport at a time." And so he goes, "I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I want you to make a decision." And I decided football. Matt, I'm telling you, when we talk about you get to forks and roads and you make a decision that might end up being the right decision, choosing football ended up with me getting a college scholarship. If I would have chose boxing, I was at that age where I was starting to really admire the cholos, which are we now call gang members. Now I'd lost my mom. I'm boxing. I'm at that age that's very malleable. My dad was really struggling, trying to keep up on things, have a new stepmom. We can only imagine where I could have gone, having stayed in that sport. And so, took the right path and went right instead of left in regard to that.
I think in previous conversations, you'd shared some like pretty intimate stories, like where maybe it was one of the cholos or something that like was kind of a mentor to you, but also sort of kept you out of that. And because you're checking some boxes here. One, you've got a skill set at violence, right? Two, you're at risk and underserved in a hard community. Three, there's a significant amount of racism that is interconnected to your story, and that produces oftentimes somebody who makes a certain set of choices. And I know you were right there where that was one possible outcome.
Yeah, so yeah, I'll kind of go. I'll go quickly over those stories, um, and how they played out. But the first thing in terms of if you want to talk about early experiences of racism, I always tell the story that my best friend stole a candy bar, and I'm the one that went to jail.
Hmm.
And the reality was when he stole this candy bar, I was with him at the 7-Eleven, and the owner of the 7-Eleven grabbed us both, called the police.
Mm.
The police put us both, and I mean, they handcuffed us. They just didn't sit there and talk. They handcuffed us, put us in the squad car, and they took us up to the police station. They immediately put me in the cell. They put us both in the cell, and then they immediately removed him, and he left. He went. They took him home. They left me there, and they wouldn't. They left me there until my parents came and got me. So when my parents came and got me, they said that I was the one that, I stole this candy bar. I shouldn't, they're bad parents. I'm going to be a bad kid. I'm going to follow all these things. So my parents then bring me back home, and they're pretty upset. I'm trying to explain to them it wasn't me, but of course they're sitting there saying, "Yeah, you're lying," those kind of things. And this is, there's intersections of good people out there that have have helped me along the way. Whether it was this Tolo that I'm going to talk about here in a second, or this friend of mine's mom, or Don Bass, who kind of gave me my start here at
Mm.
Adams, in the counter ed program. There's been people there that have been supporters of me and what I can do. But anyway, so I get home, my mom's just really upset, and the doorbell rings, or they knock on the door. We lived in a trailer, so there was no doorbell. They knocked on the trailer, and we opened it up, and it was Duber. His name was Duber. His Duber's mom, and she came in, and she explained that Duber went home and told his mom it was me, not Mark. Mark
Mm.
did nothing here. And I mean, for a young kid, he could have easily just not said a word,
Mhm.
saved himself, and then let me kind of deal with it. But he's the one that went to his mom and said, "Mom, they,
That's not what
you
happened.
know, it's not him, it's me." So she came over and made Duber come and explain that it was him. After they left, that's when I got my talk from my dad that, life isn't going to be equal for you, and it's not going to be easy for you.
Mm.
There's going to be a lot of things that you're going to have to do in your life that you're just going to have to smile and do your job and not question. And that tends to be consistent with people, underrepresented people that are, you're being taught how to act in our society. And that's where I grew up, is just remembering, when I do have to consciously do this. When police pull me over, I put both hands on the wheel. I never move them. And I try to get, have my license and all that stuff in a place that I can easily get to and hand it to them, even before they get to the car. I don't question. I don't try to challenge. I don't try to do any of these things that sometimes you see on YouTube, what your laws and rights and all these things are. I just do what I do to get out of the
Mhm.
situation. Take my ticket, sign my ticket, um, and it tends to help you. But those are the generational
So
trauma
it's
things
interesting
that
just to
you
hear
learn.
your dad, because there's two different lessons, right? Like one is he taught you to be a fighter, like literally taught you
Yeah,
he got you into boxing, so he wanted that for you as well. But he also, kind of stressed this idea that there are fights that you don't want to fight.
absolutely. Absolutely. There's times to fight and there's times not to.
Hmm.
And that's kind of what he taught me. Now, getting back to the Cholo. So I went the football way and I was pretty good at it. Um, get into high school. And when I started to get into high school, I started to do really well. I was the only freshman on the varsity team. Started, played, all the way through. But they always remembered me. In my school, there were the Cowboys, the Jocks, and the Cholos. And it was almost like putting three scorpions in a bowl, and you try to see if they're going to fight. And the reality is, if you put three, if you put a, or if you put a scorpion, a centipede, and a black widow in a bowl, they're going to leave each other alone. They know the order of the world, and so they, even if you try to provoke them, they're still going to kind of keep away from each other. And in my school system, that's what you had, and none of them got along. And I happened to be a athlete who was very connected. So when I walked over to our South campus where all the cholos were, I had a privilege. And when we talk about what privilege is,
Mm.
I had a privilege because they would leave me alone. They would give guff to the other people that I may have been with, the other athletes that I was with, but they would basically leave me alone. And I would leave them alone. And I would get and sit in class with them and we'd get along. And but it wasn't always that with everyone else. Well, about I believe it was my senior year, no, it was my junior year. My junior year, there was a talk of there was going to be a big brawl. And it just boiled over. All three groups were going to just have a big old riot. And it was going to be right after school. Or it was going to be a sixth period, the last part of the day, and it was all brewing. I mean, teachers were trying to figure out what to do. It was going to brew. And I remember walking from South Campus back to my class up at North Campus, and that cholo that I was talking about, he walked up to me and he just said, "Look, Mark, you need to go home, and you need to go home now. You don't need to be part of this. You don't need to get wrapped up in this. Just don't even question what I'm saying. Go home." And so I did. I went and jumped the fence, went home, and there was a huge big brawl. And some people got stabbed. No, nobody got killed or anything like that. But it was a big old brawl. Suspensions were going on. If you were suspended, you weren't allowed to play in sports. And he basically saved me. Then my senior year comes around, and I ended up becoming an All-American. So the season was a really good season.
Mm.
And by probably halfway through the season, when I would go off the field, all the cholos they started coming to the games to watch. And when I would go off the field, they'd all line up so I could walk out and slap their hands and kind of doing that kind of thing. So,
Mm.
they just kind of supported me without putting a lot of pressure of, hey, you're not one of us. You need to be one of us. They just kind of, it was just kind of a neat thing.
So there's something really powerful about that. That there was something healing, even in entrenched, violent groups that opposed each other. There was at least something that was able to transcend. In some ways, that centered around you. Probably you got some free passes because of your background in boxing, and you knew some of those people, and so they selected you as somebody they were gonna leave alone at least, and
Yeah.
then watched you succeed, and somehow that was one of those things that maybe was able to knit together, some form of healing, right? Like something.
Yeah.
That
Yeah. And it
isn't
wasn't
just
a
violence
transactional relationship. It was they weren't saying you were going to do this and you're going to give us something in return. It was
Mm.
truly
Mm.
you have a lot of talent and we want to see you go somewhere. So,
And I also can just hear that sort of thin line that you're riding, where it's sports were your escape, and specifically the correct sport. Had you
yeah.
selected a different sport, and your outcome might have been very, very different. But it was football, and had you gotten that suspension or whatever, I mean, you might have missed scholarships. You might have not been able to get admitted into a college. And I mean, because to get to where you are, the PhD level, like you have to bypass a lot of obstacles. And there's a
Yeah.
lot of ways you can undermine your capacity to do that. And getting suspended, getting thrown off the football team is absolutely one of those things. And had some of those things happen, like you just wouldn't be here, you wouldn't have done the things that you may have done some other things, but it just wouldn't be this.
Absolutely, absolutely. And and school wasn't easy for me. If it wasn't, I was literally ready to join the Marine Corps. I had a counselor saying, "You're Marine Corps material. You're not college material."
Mm.
I had the athletic scholarships, but she didn't believe I could do it academically.
Mm.
I was diagnosed with a learning disability, dyslexia,
Dyslexia.
when I was in college, getting my master's, not
Mm.
in elementary or high school. So I went through school dealing with this because we grew up in the community we were in. They didn't have the resources to be able to find out that you had this. So they just treated you as you just weren't motivated. You weren't, applying yourself. Those types of things. So I went all the way through just surviving, and and I tell people right now, if I wouldn't have received a scholarship, I would have never went to college. You'd be talking to somebody completely different right now if it wouldn't have
Mm.
been for that.
Mm-hmm. So dyslexia, that kind of a background, but eventually you were able to get out of that environment and into college. And at some point in time, I'm assuming academia became something that clicked for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting because I've had people sit there and well, actually, when they found out that I was struggling in school, I got into my master's degree, and Don Batts and Susan Varheely, they were my instructors,
Mm,
and I remember, and they're John Holmes. I can't ever, you never met John. John passed away back in 2000,
mm,
but John Holmes literally was, you know a mentor of all mentors,
mm,
without even saying anything. Lena Samora, she was she was the one that sent me to the admissions office to get my first job.
mm.
She wasn't my advisor, but she was just one of the one of the faculty here at the time. And I mean, I could just go through names that are just absolutely incredible. When I got Alumni of the Year, she called me. She never talks to anybody. She gave me a call, and she was really supportive of that. But the I was going through my master's program and I was struggling academically. And I remember they sat me down and they were, two things happened. One, I went from undergraduate to graduate, and I had that mentality of undergraduate going into graduate. Oh, you get three misses. It's not a big deal if you're late. Well, it is in a graduate program, and they let me know that. So I had to change my thinking about wanting to be there. And then the second thing is in one of them said this, and I think it was John, but he said, "You know what, Mark? You're incredibly intelligent, but something's happening from here to here. You're losing something from the time that, because you can speak really well, but when you're putting it on paper, it's not coming out the way you're speaking it well. There's something going on." So they sent me away to go get tested, and that's where
That's where
it's a
you were.
processing thing. And so, and even to this day, if I'm a little bit tired, I might stutter a little bit more, or I might have a word that I can't really get out. But what they had me understand
Mm,
was that you're not dumb. Because growing up, I always felt I was dumb. What they made me do is it gave me a lot of confidence when
mm,
I found out. And I didn't use it as a crutch. I went through my PhD program, and it wasn't until the very end that I said I had this. And at the very end of the program, my advisor wrote a little note to me and says, "You're not dyslexic." And he didn't mean that by saying I'm lying.
mm,
He meant that by saying you've overcome this,
mhm,
and you don't use it as a crutch.
mm.
Uh, and that's how I am as a teacher. I don't want you to come in feeling that this is why know this is why the way you are, but figure out the ways that you can overcome those things to be who you want to be.
Not be defined by them. It's interesting because dyslexia is in my family. One of my nephews has it. My dad, who has his doctorate from William and Mary, and has founded a program, the Center for Mentor Coaching and Leadership Development. But he also, I think he's about your age, maybe a little bit older. But they just didn't know what dyslexia was,
Hmm.
and so for him, it was just the experience of when the teacher called on him to read in front of the class. That was just mortifying. That was traumatizing. It was just like, and he was just a stupid kid. And I mean, he's got plenty of stories of being picked on and bullied and beat up. And I mean, he used to just fight all the time. Like,
Yeah,
and he was in trouble a lot for fighting, but it was more of just his response to bullying. Like he just,
yeah,
he would just fight back. And then he'd be the one to get in trouble. And I know for him in particular, that probably there was a chip on his shoulder that came from that probably was one of the driving forces that led him to be as successful academically as he wound up being, because he was very, very bright. He's a brilliant man,
yeah,
but it was masked by this processing disorder that nobody diagnosed until much later. And then his mom, just to make sure I'm giving credit where credit is due, fought for him relentlessly to get the care that he
yeah,
needed. And so that's a powerful part of his story. But I mean, dyslexia can just be a profound barrier to really just connecting with the world, connecting to especially academia, especially like testing, especially reading. These things that those are the things that are selected for are just very, very challenging. And so to navigate through that and come out the other side, at the top of the game, which is what a PhD, ultimately is that's about as high as you can go. It's a terminal degree, right?
yep,
And so, that's baked into your story. It's in my dad's story too. And, I think there's a lot of research too, about how, kids with dyslexia, kids with ADHD, like they're not less intelligent, and actually they may have some superior forms of intelligence that if we can tap into, because their brains are just wired differently than the rest of ours, and that actually can be a gift.
Absolutely. It absolutely is. And, when you tell the story about getting called to the board, I was the same way. So I would act up. I would be the class clown. I would do things to get myself in trouble, to get put out in the hallway. And then I didn't have to go up in front of the board, which just leads to another issue, because then I was falling behind because I was missing the work that I needed to do. And then it just creates more of an issue. So yeah. And what you end up doing is your fighting is less physical, and your fighting is almost trying to get back to show the people I'm not who you think I am.
Well, what more about that just the evolution from that background to how you wound up being, founding the program that you founded and becoming a counselor, I'm sure a counselor first and then a counselor educator?
Yeah, I mean, people ask me that all the time. How did you end up where you ended up? And it was never, I know people that sit there and says, I graduated from undergraduate. I went into master's knowing I wanted to be a professor. I got my PhD to be a professor, and I became a professor. My daughter's on that trajectory right now. She's in that master's. She did an undergraduate, master's, and she's recruiting. I used to be a recruiter. She's recruiting. She's like, Dad, I'm just like you, but I should be, because I used to spend most of my time behind your door at Adams State. So I didn't, mine was all happenstance. It really was. I mean, I had my sister and brother called me Columbo one time. I don't know if you remember the character of the TV show Columbo. He was he was kind of, ratty and not very, and didn't have a lot of pedigree as a detective, but he was the one that always, came out at the end. And they said that about me. My sister was sharp as a tack. My brother's brilliant, amazing, and I was just that one that I'm like that tortoise in the hare. I just kept the pace and I went through. But I ended up out of my undergrad. I started at a place called Mesa College. It's called Colorado Mesa now, in Grand Junction, Colorado. Played there for a year and a half, and then transferred to Adams State. Finished playing my years here. We went to the national championship for football.
Yeah, you guys have some great athletics.
So I mean, we had it. I mean, it was a great run. It's great experiences. As a matter of fact, I'm getting ready to take this. I'm sending it in. An amazing story. When you want to talk about miracles that I think are God sent miracles, this is one of them, and it's my national championship football ring. I lost it for over 30 years. Literally lost it. I left it in a bathroom in Walsenburg, Colorado. I washing my hands, and I drove off, got home, and remember I forgot it. Never saw it again, and lost it for 32 years.
Wow.
I'm going to divert for a second to tell this story, and then I'll get back to my thing. But I left this ring in Walsenburg, Colorado, and it disappeared. It has real diamonds on it, and 3 little diamonds, and I'm like, I'll never see it again. Somebody's going to melt down the silver. They're gonna take it and make a ring out of it, something like that, and it was gone. My dad was devastated. He was absolutely devastated when I told him I lost the ring, and he goes, "I can't afford to have you replace it, but let me see if we can get. Yeah, I'll help you out." So I was able to buy the knockoff, the non-silver one, sterling silver one. I got the Celestium, and they did a basic one, and I still have it. It looks just like it, but it's not the real thing. And he was more devastated than I was, and for 32 years. And right before he died, I know he was. I truly believe he was here to take care of me. He didn't want to leave because he'd take care of me. And back to that book, Neil Donald Walsh was talking about bodyguards. God says we have bodyguards. When people want to die, we as families stay around them and we don't let them go. We sit around their bed for 24 hours, 7. We take shifts. And if you ever notice, many people will go to lunch and that's when the person passes away. Or they step away to go take a shower and that's when the person passes away. And so I remember taking care of him every single day. I'd go to lunch, dinner, breakfast. I would, wash his face, shave him, give him a haircut. And I just noticed that I'm like, you know what, Dad, you're here for me. And one day He was laying in bed. He wasn't feeling well, and I just put my hand on his chest and I said, "Dad, I want you to go. I don't want you to be here for me. I can take care of myself. I want you to be happy. I know you're not happy, and I want you to just go, be in peace. I
Mm.
just asked two things, and he was out of it. So it's not like he could go yes or no, but I know he heard me, and I'll tell you why. But I told you I only want two things, Dad. One, I want you to tell Mom I love her and give her a hug and give her a kiss. Two, I want you to send me a message that you made it.
Mm.
Okay. Those are the two things I asked him for. So he died in November. We buried him in November 2nd, buried him 22nd. And my wife and I were sitting watching TV during Christmas break. I open up my email and I get all of a sudden this email pops up and it says, "Do you know who owns this ring?" And I looked at it and I said, "Yeah, me. That was my ring." And he goes, "Well, how do I know you are who you are?" And I said, "Well, I work at Adams State. That's how they found me." He goes, "Can you send me a picture of you playing football?"
Mm.
So I went and found a picture, sent it to him. So we went back and forth, and I was getting a little bit suspicious. I'm like, is this somebody trying to say, "I have this, do you want this?" And he goes, "Do you want it back?" And I said, "Yeah, I want it back." And he says, "Well, you're going to have to come get it. It's in Cuba, New Mexico." And so Walsenburg is over here on the east side of the mountain, and Cuba is way down by Farmington, New Mexico. I mean, so we're talking a couple hundred miles away.
Yeah,
How
yeah.
did this ring get from Walsenburg over there? And they said, "You need to come get it." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, here we go." And so it's a long story short, because I don't want to share as much of my paranoia as I would like to. I was a little bit paranoid,
I bet.
and it was a young kid, and he says, "I have your ring." And so over a couple of days, it turned out that he finally confessed that
Mm.
he confessed because he wanted me to go get it. And he finally confessed. He goes, "My aunt owns a store here in Cuba, New Mexico. And one day, about 20 years ago, she found it right outside her door at the store and thought somebody lost it, put it in her safe, and it's been there ever since. She's
Crazy.
getting ready to retire, and she found it, and she goes, I don't know anything about technology,
Huh.
and I'd sure like to find who owns this ring." And he goes, "I can do it." And all you have to do is type in Manzanares, Mark Manzanares, because it says that on the inside, and I'm
Huh.
going to pop up Adams State University. It says Adams State on it. So he just wrote me an email. So it's fairly simple how he did it, but finally he gave me his aunt's phone number. I called her and I said, "He won't let me have the ring. Is there something going on? I'm a little bit scared." He goes, "Oh my God." He goes, "He just wants to meet you because he thinks this is just the greatest story in the world." And so he goes, she goes, "I'll mail it to you tomorrow." But he was just a young kid, 18 years old, who, it sounds like this
He
something
just,
you'd see at the end of
yeah, solved this
Dateline or something.
mystery, and yeah,
Yeah, or
he was just
Facebook
living the
encounter.
story.
Literally. But I found it. And the key piece here, Matt, is
Mm.
this is my message for my dad that he made it. How do you lose a ring for 32 years? And
Mm.
within 1 month of the day my dad died, and I told him, "Send me a message." He was so devastated when I lost this. I know when he passed, he went and found that ring and got everything rolling. So
Mm.
that's another one of those little God winks of he made it, and
Mm.
he let me know that he made it.
Mm.
Um, so getting back to Adams State, I graduated from undergraduate, didn't have a job, didn't know what I was going to do. Lena Samora, who I just mentioned a few minutes ago, she turned around and said, I was walking down the hall. We used to have to sign out. When you graduated, you had this little card and you'd have to go to the department and get them sign it, make sure you didn't owe money. You did the
Mm.
old school way of doing it. And I was walking down the hall, me and my friend, and Lena Samora was in her office, and she goes, "Hey, Manzanares or Manzanares," because she used to speak real. And I said, "What?" And she goes, "Come here." And I walked into her office, and she goes, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm signing out." She goes, "No, dummy." She goes, "What are you doing with your life?" And she was a firecracker. And I said, "I don't know." She goes, "You don't have a job?" And I said, "No, I don't have a job." And she goes, "Okay, I want you to go to the admissions office and I want you to tell them I send you. Apparently a job opened up and they reached out to her
Mm-hmm.
and they wanted somebody that they felt would have been a good in this position. And she goes, I want you to go tell them I sent you and dress up. No, she didn't say dress up. She goes, I want you to tell them I sent you and they have a job there. And so I was getting ready to leave and she goes, hey, and I turned around and she goes, and dress up. And then her last comment was, she goes, don't embarrass me. That was her last comment. She goes, do something good and don't embarrass me. And so I left and I went over there, went back to my dorm, got dressed up and went over and introduced myself, got the job in admissions. I was an admissions counselor intern. I was a recruiter. And so I started working there at $16,000 a year. But part of the job was you got a very low pay, but they gave you housing and they paid for your master's degree.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to pick and back then we had three masters. We had teaching, physical education, no, for art and counseling. And I couldn't be a teacher because you had to have a teacher's license, so I didn't have that as a bachelor's degree. I couldn't be PE either because you had to have a teaching degree. If you ever saw me draw, you would know why I didn't do the art program. And so the only one left was counseling.
Oh.
And I'm like, okay. I mean, I used to be a peer counselor when I was in high school. I was pretty good at it. So I think I'll do the counseling one. So you can already tell that it wasn't like this calling
Yeah.
that, I had my maturity to be in there. So that's why I struggled that first year. And they were able to see my commitment as well as my academics. So they made me do the program. So that year I flunked out that summer. And then I had to come back the next summer because it was a summer program. And I didn't want to tell anybody that I didn't do well because of my learning that later I found out, and they sent me away to find out if I had a learning disability, which I did. But I didn't want to tell my dad that I didn't do well. Didn't want to tell my girlfriend, which is my wife now, that I didn't do well. So I told nobody. I didn't want to tell my job because I thought they would fire me because that was part of my job. So I just held on to it. You have to take 9 hours. The next summer, I retook those 9 hours plus the new 9 hours. I completed 18 hours in one summer, 8-week session.
Mm-hmm.
And they couldn't believe I had done that. But I graduated with my master's and I wanted to stay in the recruiting student personnel. So I didn't go into the counseling thing. I worked in the counseling center, did the counseling there, and just stayed in student personnel administration. And then I was really into technology, but technology back then was not much.
Yeah,
I mean, I remember I always tell everybody the big joke is I brought the first computer mouse on campus. I brought the first computer mouse on campus during that era. I brought the first flat panel monitor on our campus. They used to have those big boxes. And I brought that on campus when I got a grant to build a computer lab. And I brought the newest technology into campus. But I was kind of a techy kind of person. And part of my job was to teach the ambassadors about Adams State and the history of Adams. So I built a course called The History of Adams. I used to teach the course, and then I had the Ghosts of Adams. And Don Bass, who was the chair at the time, heard about my teaching and my class and thought, this guy can teach. And he kind of has a technology background. And we're trying to get somebody in here to kind of make us a better technology place, not online, but better technology with our video and those types of things at all our sites. So he invited me. He said, I'm interested in hiring you. We have an opening. I'd like to hire you. And at that same time, that week, I got a promotion to be the assistant dean of enrollment management. So I turned him down to take this job. And he looked at me and said, I don't give second chances. His last words, I don't give second chances. So I went a year in. We had my daughter. I couldn't stand traveling knowing that I had this little baby and I was missing a lot of firsts. So I went back to Don and I said, will you hire me back?
You give me a second chance.
And he goes, I told you I don't give second chances. So I walked away, and about 2 weeks later, I get an email from him, not an email, an inner office, because there was no email back then. And it said, hey, meet me at the campus cafe. And so I went back over there and he offered me the job. And he goes, but I need you to get a PhD. And back then, there wasn't the counselor education supervision. Most PhDs were in counseling. You could get one in counselor ed and supervision. I said, what do I have to do that? And he goes, no, I want you to get a degree that's going to help our program. So I went to Colorado State University and got a degree in adult learning theory, distance learning technologies, and leadership. And so my whole program was learning. We weren't even like literally thinking online, but it was all about distance learning technologies online. All these different pieces, and I was learning them, and I was bringing them back.
So you
And
were
at that
working
time,
at Adams State while going
I
through
was teaching
your
at
MBA.
Adams State full time, lecturing, teaching all these students, and also doing this technology piece. So Don Bass had then become the dean, so he was out of the department. Susan Varheely came in, and she was our chair. And as I was bringing these technologies, she would say, "Hey, let's try that with our counseling program." And so I'm like, "Okay." And so we would have discussion boards as a hybrid kind of model. And we started to notice that the students were really, so in the month, we would go once a month or once a week, depending on whether once a week or once a month to these areas. And then in between, we would do discussions. And we noticed the students were really picking up on it and really liking them. And so we were then bringing in another technology. And Susan hated traveling. Hated it. She hated going over mountain passes. So she was trying to figure out ways to teach. So they used to have what's called PICTEL, picture television, where she would sit in a classroom here, and then all the students would have to go to a classroom at Fort Lewis, and they would have like we are doing right now, but in a classroom. And so that's what they were doing at that time. And I started to bring in technologies. It was called WIMBA. It was like a Zoom. And I said, "Hey, Susan, you don't need to sit in a classroom. You can do it from your home." And they can sit in their homes and do it. And we can start to do this. So we brought that in. But that we were still on dial-up. So technology wasn't having caught up. So we were doing those kind of things. So when I started doing my dissertation, Don came back to the department. They got rid of deans. What's that?
What did you do your dissertation on?
My dissertation is on counselor education satisfaction of using online for counselor ed program.
Interesting.
So it was basically, there was no such thing as technology, nothing online. I couldn't even find books in counselor ed. We were one of the first programs ever to do this. Even the online programs like Capella and Phoenix was not doing online. You would meet, you would have to fly in and meet. And so we started doing this, and people are like, you can't do counseling online. Everyone kept saying that. So my dissertation was these 4 technologies, which was a LMS, learning management system like Blackboard. It's not Kaltura, but it was a video server to show videos. People do counseling on videos. Then it was a video recorder so that they could do their lessons. And then it was WIMBA, which was like Zoom. And we were using that, and we wanted to see if students were satisfied in a counseling program and felt like they could still learn equally. There's a book out there called No Significant Difference, which talks about online versus face-to-face. And so I did my dissertation on this, and it came back highly positive. A student wanting the flexibility. They didn't want to have to drive all the way to Grand Junction, Durango, or Pueblo. And so from there, me, Don, and Susan were sitting in a room, and Susan said, "Let's go online." And Don said, "Yeah, we think we can do it. Your results showed that we can do it." And they said, "Mark, you got to be the tech person. This will fail if we don't have somebody making sure these students know how to use the technology." And at that time, I was doing it with teacher education. I was going around teaching them all the tech, getting them ready, supporting it, building the courses. I was doing everything. And so they said, "We are going to do it in counselor ed." So that's why they brought me in. I got my PhD in this area. And in 2000, I graduated in 2004. And then in 2005, we started the program. Don with his, ability to build programs, Susan and her support of the online, and me, the tech support for everything. We were hoping to have 12 students to break even. Our first semester, we had 66. And it never stopped. And now we have just under 1,000.
Yeah. That's so incredible. And I'm linking up my own experiences. Also, I just love that the online master's program was started because Susan Verheely didn't really like driving to teach.
It
Yeah,
literally,
that is the driving force was literally driving.
literally, she did not want to drive over the pass, especially in the winter. And she gave me a mandate to learn how to fix this technology for counselor education. Um,
Well,
yeah.
and so I think I came around 2012 or something like that, maybe a little earlier than that. I'd have to look back, but it was interesting because I've really watched the program evolve myself, and I do want to talk a little bit about higher education in general at some point. But like, you've been through just a tremendous evolution. I mean, the wave of technology has just transformed the world. It's transformed everything in the world, including education. But when I first came, we were still doing float trips down the Rio Grande, and so you had to come for a week, and we called them intensives back then. I know they've softened the language a little bit, but it was just intense. It was brutal stuff, and you got grilled and you cried, and they for a week straight, and that's where you really learned to be a counselor. And the rest of it was the nuts and bolts, I would say, but like really the spirit, the soul of counseling was definitely learned during those intensives online while we were there, and it was just sacred. Like, it's just a sacred place. But then even some of that, like, it's kind of drifted more towards more of an emphasis on online, especially as your numbers increase, and now you're looking at trying to coordinate 1,000 people instead of 67 or whatever it was originally. And yeah, I'm just curious, kind of what your perspective is on just the evolution of the program as a whole.
Yeah, and as I say this, I don't want to say this in the sense of I think we're less than, because I still think we have the quality of a program. The one thing that Susan, Don, and myself, Terry, and Teresa wanted when we had the spirit of wanting to create this program was we want to do it different. We don't want to do it in an asynchronous training like model. We want it to be about the relationship of counseling. We want it to be about your own personal self-growth. We really want it to be that way. We train well. We still do well. But I still have that spirit in my classes about I'm going to get to know you, develop a relationship, and I'm going to challenge you on a personal level. I want you to grow as a person, because as you grow as a person, you're going to grow as a counselor. I am saddened by the fact that we got rid of the 1 week intensives. The history of those intensives were, we wanted to make sure that we were seeing you and seeing your skills and seeing you grow. So our first intensives literally went from Saturday, it'd start on Saturday night with classes on Sunday, all the way till Saturday we called them candidacy interviews, if you remember them.
Oh yeah.
And then after your candidacy, we'd have an afternoon off and start the next group for 3 weeks straight. Actually, it started with 2 weeks at first, and then we grew into 3 weeks. And we were actually entertaining the fourth week up until 2020, when I had stepped down and the new director came in. And I would like to say it was just the evolution, but the evolution of the faculty didn't want to work during the summertime. I had no problem working in the summertime. I would be right now gearing up for in June 1st being our first intensive all the way through the month of June. But a lot of the faculty didn't want to do that. They wanted to feel like, I want my summers off. So the new director and the admin of that team decided we can still meet KCREP standards by the number of hours you have to meet, and do it in 3 days, as opposed to, we used to, in the intensives, even though they were a week, you come in on a Sunday and do the required orientation. That was that dinner. And it's required. That's why you'd flunk if you missed it, because it's a KCREP requirement. Then you would have class Monday, Tuesday. Wednesday, we called it a day of reflection, so you could reflect on the 2 days that you had for the first two of your challenges. And then Thursday and Friday, you would have 2 more days, and then you'd go into candidacy. The day of reflection actually came from a student. The student, she talked about her first 2 days, she was bombing. She was getting ready to be washed out. And she actually ended up becoming a counselor of the year. But she talked about how she literally, and the faculty member were saying, if you don't change, and that was the opportunity. You had the first 2 days, and you have 2 days to change before you can show that you can move forward. Back then, you'd go on the river of the Rio Grande, or you would go on up to the sand dunes. 1 week we'd do one, the other week we'd do the other. And so we were at the sand dunes that particular year, and she went on a hike. She took off on Tuesday, really down on herself and really upset, and went on this hike and had this moment
Mm.
on her hike. And when she came back down, Matt, it was like night and day. She literally let herself go, opened herself up to vulnerability, risk, genuineness, and she just soared.
Mm.
And when we were talking to her later, we asked, what was it about? And she goes, you know what? It was that Wednesday day that I had a time to reflect.
Mm.
That's where we came up with the name Day of Reflection. And
And how
it wasn't,
therapeutic, you know.
yeah, and
And
it
in this
wasn't
instance, but for all of us that were going through that program, I mean, because I went
yeah,
through the long intensives while I was in the master's program.
yeah. And we took you, you know why we took you rafting? One, it's fun, but two, it was an opportunity for you to see counseling is like a river raft.
Mm-hmm.
It's like whitewater rafting. Because I tell my students in pre-practicum, I says, you ever been whitewater rafting? Yes. Do you notice what do you do when the water is just calm?
Mm.
You're just in the boat. You're enjoying. You're kind of doing.
Drift on
When you
down.
hit the white rapids, some people think you ride the rapids. You don't. You work through the rapids. You literally have to work all the way through. So when you're in counseling, that is you're in the whitewater rapids. You
Mm-hmm.
got to do the work to get yourself out. Sometimes you get stuck, and we call it an eddy.
Mm.
So in counseling, you get in this eddy and you're not doing anything. And so you have to get yourself back out of that. And so when you go in that raft, you can reflect. You have a chance to think about your first 2 days on those calm rivers. And then when you get to the white water, you're going to work through it. And then sometimes you get stuck in that eddy. How do you get yourself out of it? So there was a purpose for why we were doing it. It wasn't just fun and a barbecue. And then my personal feeling, if you remember, we did a barbecue, and I don't know if we were doing it. We started in 2000, probably 15, because we were just always doing a barbecue. We'd hire somebody to do the barbecue. What I started to do is, I am so I don't even know how to say it. You as students provide for me and my family. If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be here and I wouldn't have an opportunity to do this. And I just admire the students putting all their time and all their work. I know they're getting a degree, but they give me the opportunity to share who I am, share the relationship, share all these things. So on that day, I think it was our time to provide for you.
Mm.
And in spirituality, I think breaking bread's the most spiritual thing you could ever do. And so when you have to share a meal, and I'm a foodie, if you've ever seen me, you can tell that. But I think the most spiritual thing you could ever do is break a bread, and the best thing you can do is provide for somebody. So on that day, I would cook, and the staff would cook for you to serve you because what you've done for us, that we wouldn't have this program if it wasn't for you.
Well,
So we
it's
did
also
that.
the final edict in the fourth gospel. You know, Peter is told 3 times. There's not too many things that Jesus ever repeated 3 times. Feed my sheep.
Yeah,
Feed my sheep. Do you love me?
literally,
Do you love me?
literally, and that's what I wanted. So people always, and there was a couple of faculty, young faculty, that would come back and, why are we having to do this? Why are we feeding? Why don't we hire this out? We have the money. Let's hire it out. They didn't want to put that kind of work in. And my thing is, they provide for us. Let's provide for them. So as long as I was the chair, we did that. Even before that, we stopped doing the river thing for a couple of years. And I asked Don if we could bring it back, and he says, I will bring it back, but everybody has to get involved because people stopped doing it. We'd have those kind of faculty take off, and when it was time for them to serve, and they wouldn't help out. So that's one of the things that we would do. So when we switched to the 3-day format, we still give the students the same amount of time that we did for the 1 week, but they're eliminating all that other stuff, the reflection, those important pieces of your own personal self growth. So we've become more training, but yet we're still doing a good job.
Yeah, you are, and I was, as one of the PhD students, because you really brought the PhD students into we were educators, we were teaching classes, and we were part of those discussions, and it was a push and pull. I mean, I just remember being a part of those discussions as to whether or not they should shrink down the intensive week, and what are there was a give and take there. And I wanted to share a story that, and maybe I've told you this one before, but it was my intensives, and it was the first time I came out. And my background was pretty rough prior to coming to counseling. It's somewhat miraculous that I even lived through my early 20s and was able to find my way to Adams State and come be a counselor. And I had, it was something like imposter syndrome, but it was more of this inner belief that if people found out who I actually was, there's just no way, like they'll fail me out of this program. They'll I won't be accepted, and for, but I probably had some good reasons for believing that about myself. And I was in Jared Tiemann. It was his very, very first year as a professor. And I mean, and he wound up being the chair for my dissertation. And I was very loyal to him because, in particular because of this moment in time. But, it was finally my turn, and it's so crazy, right? Because you're asked to talk about your most personal, your deepest stuff, right? But you're doing it, and you're getting graded, and you're surrounded by a group of your peers, and literally like an arena, like they're in chairs all around you, watching you, judging you. I mean, they are, whether you think they are or not. And then I volunteered with Jared, and Jared has this way of looking at you with like he just doesn't believe anything that you're saying. Like he's got this furrow in his brow that just cuts through you like a knife. And I'm not the only person who's experienced this, but like he blew through my defense mechanisms in about 30 seconds. And I was just utterly exposed. And it was bordering on a traumatic experience for me. And it was on a Tuesday. And I believe that the rafting trip got canceled because there were fires that year. And
yes.
And so that I had the next day, and he kind of just let us go. And I went fishing on the Conejos River, and I was just shattered. Like I was disoriented. I was unsure of who, it was an identity crisis. Like there was something about this. And I was only there for 4 or 5 minutes with him in this fishbowl, this dyad. And he just shattered my defenses. And in that kind of a way, and then as Jared typically does, just like leaves you out there to kind of dry and put it back together, and I was able to put it back together, and he didn't. I was worried I was going to kick, I was going to fail, I was going to have to repeat all of those things, but came back and found my path through, and he really said some very encouraging things that built me up and helped me believe that I was where I was supposed to be. And I owe him an enormous debt of gratitude for that. And then he was a great chair for my dissertation and all of those things, and has been a mentor as well. But the level of intensity of that experience, I want to share one other one too, because this was so pivotal in my formation, and this is the program that you built. But it was another moment where I just learned who I am. And so I believe it was also the first year, and we used to do these group counseling, and so they weren't graded. You were assigned a group, and you outsourced a lot of it. So this was another counselor, just from the local town. And I walked into the room, and there was me and like 7 women, and they were all just much older than I was. I was 26, 27, that range. And I just looked around, and there was some things wrong with me, like I was not a fully formed person at this time, and just had this judgment in me, like I cannot relate to these people. I cannot connect to these people. I cannot believe that I'm going to be stuck for 2+ hours every day, with these people. And then the counselor himself was a very, he was like, he had like a teddy bear, and we had to talk to our inner child. And this was just like utterly horrendous for me. And the week unfolded, and we went through all these things together. And by the time that we were done, I was so deeply connected to those 7 women that we had cried together, we had bled together, we had went to war together, and come out the other side and emerged as counselors. And I learned something profound, which is that when you know people, there's a thread of our humanity that just connects us, that transcends what we look like, and just about everything else. And so they became my friends. I mean, I stayed connected to them through the program, and we grew together, and eventually became counselors. And so those were some of my really pivotal experiences at Adams State, and it's a beautiful program.
Yeah. And that's the interesting thing about so what happened with you and Jared in the pre-practicum class, we had set up these growth groups for you to process those things in there. And it was almost like the twofold. And then your fishing trip gave you an opportunity. So we always say counseling doesn't happen in the room.
Hmm.
Counseling happens outside of the room when you go and reflect and process. So what you did is you got the hit there, you got to process, and then the growth group was there for you to process what was happening in that particular moment. That's why we hired people that were not associated with the program. They were never allowed to tell us what was ever discussed in those things. And it was literally just like a growth group experience for you. And that's one of the things that we've stopped doing in order to shorten the amount of week. We eliminated the growth group. And now we've eliminated group
Hmm.
class at those intensives. And now we're just doing pre-practicum and practicum.
Hmm.
But again, it's the evolution of how things are being done now.
Hmm.
It's a place where, as an educator, I have to be able to adapt and be able to adapt to the changes that are being done. Back in those days, we could do more teaching instead of just fish bowls. We could do more teaching. Sometimes we do a lecture, a short video, those kind of things. And now we don't do any of that. We just go training from bell to bell kind of thing.
Hmm. It's still, I mean, and I taught a lot of those intensives in that new format where it was 3 days, and we were able to make a lot of progress in even those periods
Oh,
of time. And
absolutely,
mm,
absolutely, and that's what I think. I think that's what makes it believable that you can continue to
mm,
do it. It's a different way of doing it, but the same quality is still there.
the quality is still there.
As much as I'm saddened that we're not doing that, I'm not. I'm not dismayed by our program. We're still doing amazing work with what we're doing.
Well, so a question just kind of about the evolution, and this is just about academia. This is about higher ed. But you've ridden that wave kind of through the whole thing. Through technology, through the advancement of our field. Even as it's really become an accepted field. Like, I mean, that's all been a transition. But I remember, and it's a book that you had us read in our PhD, and I'd actually read it before. It was one of my favorite books. But the Coddling of the American Mind by Jonathan Haidt, who described some of the consequences of, it's not multiculturalism. It's more like wokeism. It's something like that. But the coddling, and you clarify any of this stuff that I'm getting wrong, but that, the safe spaces, that we turned our children somewhat fragile. And he talks about anti-fragility. He uses the analogy of of peanut allergies, and that we discovered peanut allergies, and so they just outlawed peanut butter and any peanut related product at all of the elementary schools. And that the inconsequence of that was that because there was no exposure to peanuts, that that more people wound up with peanut allergies. Like, that was the inconsequence of that campaign. And I very distinctly remember these types of experiences. Like, I never felt very secure, especially in the PhD program, because there was a force that could be turned on me specifically. And it had a lot to do with being a white male, being confident, being those types of things where, and, even I had students that, called me a white supremacist. And there were processes that were set up in place that allowed people to target other people based on criteria that maybe didn't have much to do with their qualities, in academia. And I'm just curious as to, like, you had us read that book. That was a critique of wokeism, I think. But also there is this necessity to acknowledge diversity. There is this, and the story that you told about your upbringing is you had some obstacles I didn't have. And they had a lot to do with your race and your background and those types of things. And so multiculturalism, it's just real. Like systemic racism, these are just real phenomenon that exist in our society, and we need to find ways to address them. But I also watch that unfold in academia in some fairly unhealthy ways. And so I'm wondering, and I know that Adams State was a battleground where some of those things took place, and where we were having those hard conversations and talking about those hard conversations. So yeah, just to kind of reflect on the evolution of the program and where that's at.
Yeah, I think there's kind of two questions in that whole thing when we're talking about multiculturalism and diversity and the importance of that, and then also talking about where we're at with coddling of the American mind, because it's kind of a twofold in terms of the coddling, the enabling of the youth. And what we're seeing right now is we're seeing the head of the enabling of kids. the undergraduate faculty are talking about how difficult it is to teach right now. We're finding at the college level, at the master's level, you see a student get in trouble and the parents are calling you, trying to figure out what's going on. Some of the things that are being said to you as an instructor would have never been said when I was an instructor. The peanut allergy analogy is happening in everything. One time I had a student, or it was a group of students, when I was the department chair, wanted to meet with me with the sole purpose of changing our program to meet their needs. They wanted to eliminate all the traditions of theories class, and they gave me a list in order what we should be teaching. I gave the analogy of you can't go to a store and buy a car and then when you get it home want to make it a Cadillac. You can't change it to start adding things to wanting it the way you want it, even though you came in knowing what it was. And so it has been a battle in a lot of ways. I'm not in the administration like I was or deep in the administration, which, by the way, Matt, I love it. I tell people I'm paid to teach, not to worry anymore. And so, but I'm hearing from my colleagues and in other departments and undergraduate and other institutions that education has changed in terms of the student level of what their expectations are and what they want. Now, what I'm hearing though is the alpha generation and the younger Z generation are getting tired of all this stuff. They're getting tired of social media. They're getting tired of the smartphone. They're going back to the flip phones. They're wanting some more of the traditions. You're seeing more younger people going back into church. You're seeing it kind of the pendulum going back the other way. I'm looking forward to seeing that generation coming through and see if it's changing. That on top of AI is going to be something big in higher education. We're dealing with that right now. How do you teach people to use it in a responsible way, knowing that it's not going to go away? So, when we talk about the coddling of the American mind, we're still right in that. The politics that are going on, you're seeing it in not just inner politics of the universities, you're actually seeing it the outer politics of politics. Trying to eliminate tenure, trying to, mandate the way things are being taught, those types of things that are happening. So higher education is being pelted right now, from the inside and from the outside. So there's that piece.
Well, it's been an interesting inversion too, and I think that this has something to do with the Trump administration and kind of what's come, in this new wave. But certainly when I was teaching, there was, because some of these things they were acknowledged, right? So like if I had, maybe a student with a diverse background, right? And I knew that's who I was working with, and I gave that student a C or something like that. I would be afraid of the backlash that I was going to get because we gave so much leeway and leniency towards what it is. Like it's affirmative action, it's multiculturalism, it's and would be challenged by students in these really, it was kind of dark stuff sometimes. Like, you didn't do very good work. And then I would get an email back that I was a racist and that I was this, that, and the other, and that they were going to appeal this process. And, then they'd, tell me I'm going to get kicked out of the program. And I had multiple of these types of conversations where truly it was not safe for me to do my job, which is, that idea of safety is kind of an intriguing question because the other side of that equation was arguing the same thing, that I wasn't making the space safe enough for them to learn. And we just gave a lot of credence to, people thinking that they should get a Cadillac even though they bought a Honda Civic or whatever it was. And then, okay, but I also, as a person, am particularly sensitive to issues of multiculturalism and, the history of our country. And we built this thing on slavery and we took this land from Native Americans. And there is blood in our history that needs to be accounted for. And so you're balancing these things and there's a tension there. But I really watched multiculturalism just sort of invade academia. It's now it's supposed to be a part of every single class that we taught, et cetera, et cetera. And then I watched, the Trump administration take over. And they have used that exact same insistence on multiculturalism like they've pinpointed it, and they've controlled grants, and they've almost built tendrils into all of academia so they can manage, monitor, and dictate what it is that we teach. And if we don't teach it the right way, they're gonna, which is also just an extraordinary affront to the freedom of educators to educate. And so it's like these two tensions that I'm watching, and they're behemoths on both sides of the equation battling for supremacy, and then I think educators are left somewhere in the middle trying to figure out how to educate kids.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of interesting that you say that, because anytime somebody comes up with a law, sometimes anybody comes up with something, it comes from the spirit of, if it could work in theory, but in practice, it always changes something different. It almost goes to the title of the coddling of the American mind. When what was that? The small part of it, the subheading of it, when
good ideas,
when great ideas became, bad situations, kind of thing. And so when you talk about affirmative action, and it was a great idea in theory, but in action, it became not such a great idea, because what ends up happening is we tend to use that. We use that as a tool rather than sitting there saying, I didn't do good work, I'm going to make you change. When I teach my parenting class, Matt, so my parenting class, I have this cartoon, and the cartoon it's two cells. In the first cell, it says 1960s, and there's an F on the paper, and the parents are looking at the kid and said, what did you do? And then in the new cell, it says, 2020, and there's an F on the paper, and the parents are pointing the finger at the teacher saying, what did you do? So I think it's less about, you have those students that are going to sit there and say, I'm going to go and get you fired, is the entitlement, as the coddling of the American mind. It's the entitlement of what have done in our society, rather than what the law was intended to do. And so that's what's happening. And the Trump administration is doing the same thing in a radical way as some people in affirmative action were doing in a radical way.
It's just a different type of cancel culture. I mean,
that's really all it is. And what's the coddling American mind talks about cancel culture. And we're in a cancel culture now. You don't do what I do, I'm going to cancel you out.
Cancel your grants. Yep, 100%.
Yeah, what I learned, so Lisa Holter was one of my doc students. She's doing a dissertation on gatekeeping. And
she was one of my best friends. Yeah, she was one of my best friends, and she was in my cohort. And
amazing. Lisa's amazing. And she did her talking about gatekeeping. And, one of the things that was prominent in her dissertation is, really early on in her lit review, she talked about 80% of counselor educators feel like when their students leave, they're not really ready for the field. There's a lot of what's called gate slipping. And what's happening is we get so fearful of gatekeeping that we allow the gate slipping. We allow it to say, we'll let the next instructor take care of this. We're just going to, they're close, not quite, but we'll just let them slip. And then it gets to a point where they get out and they're not ready for the world. And that's what happens. The student that come up to you and said, I'm going to report you and I'm going to do this, that can be stopped. It's simple. It can be stopped. If you have the support of your administration, if you have the support of your inner, the chair, the director, the dean, the whatever that next level up, that they got your back, it's easier to do your job. But if they don't have your back, that's what makes it difficult.
Which in the book, The Coddling of the American Mind, is full of anecdotes of universities like Evergreen University. I mean, you can look these stories up where the administration did not have the professors back. And I mean, it was pitchforks and torches, where these students were coming after them and, and ruining their lives, not just their careers.
That is higher education in a lot of ways, even prior to the Trump administration. That's the key piece. I was fortunate enough, with Don and Susan, they always said, we have your back. I mean, I remember going toe to toe with students, and they were always there to support what needed to be done. They say, as long as Don Bass had this thing, as long as you're in your syllabus, I will take it to the end. If it's not in your syllabus, you're going to lose.
Yeah, you taught
So
us
he
that
gave
well.
you that. He gave you that. And it didn't matter. I've had all sides. I've had all types of students that have done this. It's not just one particular type of student, but what we tend to do is when we coddle, we allow them, when you give that a voice, the voice gets loud. So instead of us teaching kids that there's consequences for their action and natural consequences, and we're always saving the students, they then become entitled, and that's when they say, "Well, I'll go tell daddy and mommy," and they're gonna get you fired, kind of mentality, and that's, I'm gonna use course evaluations against you. And one of the things that I had to learn early is, as an instructor, there's a couple of things you have to learn. You have to get thick-skinned about things. I always remember saying, students would say, "Don't you have compassion?" And I always used to tell them, compassion doesn't mean you're going to get your way. It means I'm going to understand where you're at, but you still have to do your job. And I'll tell you where that came from, Matt. When my mom died, I was 8 years old, and I was a screw up. We already talked about why I was a screw up, get out of situations, but I was a screw up. And I remember specifically, I mean, just had this conversation with my sister. I remember one day I was messing around, and the teacher called my name in a kind of a mark. And I looked up at her, and I must have looked at her in a certain way, but she did something, probably the worst thing anybody could ever do for anybody in a situation like this. She gave me sympathy, and sympathy is feeling sorry for me. So she looked at me and said, "Oh, you're thinking of your mom, aren't you?" And of course, the little kid that I am, I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, I'm thinking about my mom," because I wanted to get out of trouble. And she goes, "Well, why don't you just put your head down?" So rather than correct the action, she gave me sympathy. Compassion is sympathy instead of empathy. And for that rest of that year, every time I didn't want to do something, I just pretend I manipulated her. And I started to fall behind. So in addition to having a processing problem, I was also falling behind because I was manipulating the environment and situation. So the next year, I had a teacher that gave me an incredible amount of empathy, but she still needed to know I needed to do that work. And here's a really funny story for you, Matt. Ever since then, and I started teaching every single semester, and I kid you not, I have mentioned if I could find Miss Kmeyer, I would, the only thing I want to say to her is, "I'm sorry. I apologize for the way I acted in front of her, my behavior." I did that every single semester until that 2 semesters ago, we were doing our labs. I was sitting in the class and I said that. And a student came up to me after class and said, "Kmeyer, that's a really unique name." And I said, "Yes." She goes, "Do you know I'm a Kmeyer?" And I said, "You're a Kmeyer?" And she goes, "Yes. My dad's mom, my mom's is a Kmeyer. My dad was whatever her name was." And I said, "Really?" And she goes, "Yeah." And she goes, "That's really cool. I just thought that was a weird name." And she goes, "Where did you teach?" And I said, "Grants, New Mexico. It's where I went to school," and blah, blah, blah. So she left that day. She came back the next day and she goes, "Grants, New Mexico." And I said, "Yeah, that's where I was." And she goes, "Was it around 1978, 76, 74?" And I says, "Yeah, it was 1976. She goes, I have an aunt who was in Grants teaching at that same time. It happened to be Miss Kmeyer."
It's
And she
amazing.
was able to give me an email, and I finally got to say I was sorry. And of course, she came back and said, "You don't need to say it." And she goes, "You were somebody had lost, your mom. That was really tough for you. And I just knew you needed, you still had to do your work, but I cared for you." So there's the contrast of things. We give too much sympathy in our world. And in a lot of parenting right now, we're giving, it's important you have your voice. You don't need to worry about consequences. We're going to save you from feeling any pain. And then they grow up with the entitlement because they were felt sorry for rather than they understood, but you still have to do your work. And that's how higher education is.
Which I love this, Mark, because it occurred to me that I actually did take a class from you, your parenting class, during my master's program. So it wasn't until the PhD I actually did have one. It was the short summer semester. It was on love and logic, parenting, and everything that you just described is consistent. Which, if there's one modality that I recommend to parents, it's love and logic, which is, it's you give a consequence to a kid, and it's, oh man, I'm so sorry you made those choices. Like, that really stinks that you're gonna have to deal with this consequence. That you're gonna have to go clean your room. You're gonna have, like, because it shifts the blame and responsibility from whatever the consequence, from you being the person giving the consequence to the action itself, which is, I mean, for a student, like, I'm so sorry, that sucks. You got a C. I know that must have been really hard to get that C, but you can be there empathetically with that person or compassionately with that person, but also still hold a level of responsibility in the equation. And if you don't, then what happens is exactly what happened to you, where you shift all of the responsibility to your mom dying, take none of the responsibility yourself. And as educators, we allow that to happen all the time, and people don't grow that way. No. They just become more dependent on their excuse, which might even be a very good explanation for why they're making the decisions they're making. But if that is the only explanation for why they're behaving the way that, they'll just keep doing it. And nobody grows in that.
You don't grow. You end up, that's why we see a lot of high anxiety, a lot of depression. They don't have trust. They never build self-concept. They have self-esteem. This student that told you that person had high self-esteem, low self-concept. And so, they don't trust themselves. They can't, they don't believe that they have the skills or the capabilities. So they go with, this entitlement that they had. I tell my parents, somebody come up to me and say, what's one thing I can do really quick to be a better parent? And I always tell them, never tell your children you're proud of them. It's the worst thing you could ever do. And they're like, well, they go up on arms. What do you mean you don't tell a child you're proud of? And that's how they're going to grow their self-esteem. Yeah, you're right. Self-esteem, but not self-concept. He goes, what you need to do is change your thinking around this. Go to your children and say, I noticed you've done that. You must be really proud of yourself. When you say, I'm proud of you, you're owning their pride. And they're going to have a tendency to go out and do the same thing again for you to say, I'm proud of you. And then they'll keep doing it. And the first time that you don't say it, they're going to walk away and say, I can't trust you. You lied to me. That's what's happening inside their head. If you continue to tell them, you must be really proud of yourself. I've noticed how much you worked on that project, and you must be really proud. I'm really proud to be your dad. I'm owning my pride to be a father, but you're owning your pride for the work that you do. Then they tend to own their own work. They tend to own their belief system in it. And you know what, Matt? It's fun to watch them come up to you, run up to you, and instead, are you proud of me? They say, I'm so proud of myself. Look what I did. And then they walk off. And then you can walk away saying, I'm proud to be a parent because I did a really good job with that. But what we tend to do is, I'm proud of you, I'm proud of you. And then when you don't say it, they walk away.
It just externalizes the reward, and it's now something that's not in their control any longer.
Yeah.
Mark, maybe kind of some final questions here for us, but we can talk about these for a bit. But, one is, I know that you went through some particularly difficult stuff at Adams State, especially in leadership, and talk about that as much or as little as you would like to. But my perspective on that is, watching as a student going through the program it was one of the most Christian things I've ever seen somebody do. It was something I really admired, that you went through some really hard stuff in leadership and stuck with your program, continued to educate, continued to put students first. And I just saw that and admired that, still admire that. Also maybe questions about the future of higher education with all of these forces that are sort of, at our gates, retaining that capacity to care for students, to nurture students, but also still be objective and ensure that counselors who walk out our doors are equipped to go do really hard work, because counselors do really hard work. We sit inside of trauma just hour after hour after hour, and if we're not equipped for that, if we're fragile by the time we get there, like it breaks us. And I mean, I owe Jared Tiemann just an enormous debt of gratitude, because I would not have made it to the other side and been able to hold that space for other people unless he took a wrecking ball and smashed through my defenses, which is kind of what I like about him so much. But had somebody not gotten through those defenses, I would have been a fragile thing. And I would not have been equipped to become the counselor I became. And so all those questions, just take that kind of wherever you would like to.
Yeah, it comes up to a number of things. The first one is I truly believe in forgiveness. I
Mm,
learned a long time ago that forgiveness doesn't mean you have to keep the person in your life, because forgiveness is about the realization that things aren't going to be different, but doesn't mean you can't move forward. So that's one of the first things that I like to look at as I move forward. What keeps me here is you. What keeps me here are the students.
mhm,
I told you earlier that I get paid to teach, not to worry. And the best thing for me to do is just I look forward to my classes every day, every time I get on a video to tell them who I am,
mhm,
to get to know who they are. That keeps me moving, keeps me motivated, and keeps me moving. I learned a long time ago that the world is not easy. I learned a long time ago when I get taken to jail for not stealing a candy bar.
mhm,
You learn a long time ago that things are going to be hard and they're going to be rough. And if you give up every single time, what message are you sending? I have two girls that I've raised to be very strong, independent women. And if they see me pull back and give up, what message am I teaching them about giving up? I keep telling them I can handle it. I know what I'm doing and what I'm here for, and that's what it's about. Even as we talk about the students are changing, but I'm still, I've been able to change with them. And I think at the end of the day is I care about every one of them in their own way. And I want to be, as long as I feel like I'm being effective, I'll continue to do that.
mm,
Um, I got an award this last year. It's a Presidential Teaching Award,
mm,
nominated by the students. And it means so much to me. I don't usually talk about any awards that I get because I don't want to. I raised that way, but that one means so much to me because the
mm,
students are the ones that nominated me. Um, I won one back in '97. It was called. Yeah, I was nominated as. I can't remember. It's a weird name, but KSNF. It was a radio station here had an award that turned into the Presidential Teaching Award, but it is the students voted you our favorite professor award. That's what it was
mm,
called. And you got a T-shirt, and I still have that T-shirt from back in 1997. It's pretty faded, but it's one of my most cherished things that I have,
mm,
because of the fact that students felt like I was doing a good job.
mm,
And I think that's what I don't want to use the word think. I feel that's the reason I'm still here and still doing what I'm doing. I always believe this, no matter, I tell my kids this, I tell people this, I can leave here and go somewhere else, but the people are still the same. They just have different names. So you can either try to make it what you need to make it, or you can move forward.
mm,
There's a book out there. It's called Turning Point. It's not the turning point that we talk about. It's a philosophy that if you feel stuck in where you're at, you seek outside. You seek groups outside to get fill your bucket through that. So I've gotten involved with our national organization, ACES. I help them
mhm,
out with the podcast. I'm their professional development coordinator. I'm working with an AI project on we gotta have this conversation outside of this because it's going to be long. But I'm working with I'm a faculty advisor on an AI project to help students. It's AI avatars that counseling students practice on.
mm.
So you don't have to have a supervisor do your
That's so
fishbowl.
interesting.
You can
Yeah.
just do it in your living room, and you can have a counseling session, a 50
Mm,
minute counseling session with an avatar, and it gives you feedback on how
mhm.
you did and all your basic skills and all your advanced skills. I'll have to show you.
Yeah,
We'll have to
what
make
a
an appointment.
phenomenal and unbelievably creepy tool in our toolbox.
Yeah, and this one is it's less about some people are like, oh my gosh, it's going to take over. No, because it's a skill. It's the other way
Mhm,
around. I get to practice my skills. I
mhm,
get to see if the treatment works, and that kind of thing. But you're right. So that's kind of what I'm looking at when you say it's been rough here. It's been rough. It hasn't been easy at Adams State. Adams State doesn't always, doesn't, you talk about Adams State always taking care of you. Adams State didn't take care of me. People took care of me.
mhm,
Matt, you took care of me because even in the downest time, you were there to continue to tell me that I was doing good things. Lisa was there to tell me I was doing good things. Robert Duckworth. These are people that Leanne Campbell. I can name all the students that, some of my students have reached out to me. You're the people that saved me
It's
and
interesting
kept me
though
here.
that some of the ways that we communicated that to you probably was just by reaching out in our times of need. I mean, because I
Absolutely.
mean, Lisa was a dear friend of mine through the program.
Yeah.
I was probably closer to her than anybody else in the program, and we were, we got along as a cohort. But and I even think of you reaching out to that teacher, and even like the ring coming back to you. And I mean, this is just maybe even a recommendation to any students or clients of counselors. Like, we love to hear that stuff. I can only imagine that meant the world to her when you reached back out, and like, something she had done connected her heart to your heart in a way that transcended time, was still with you 20 years later, and then you found her. And I know that stuff, as counselors, as teachers, it keeps us afloat. Because we're trying to hold the terrain. Like, what we guard at those gates when we talk about gatekeeping is sacred stuff. I mean, counseling is a healing force in our world. It's one of the most important. It's certainly not the only
Yeah.
one. There's lots of others as well, but it is an
Yeah.
incredibly important healing force in our world, and we've got to guard those gates. And one of the ways we can do that is by lifting up the people who are out there sacrificing to make sure that space is protected.
Absolutely. And Matt, here's how it comes full circle. We started talking at the very beginning about your son and what that God gave him to you, and he's been sent here to be a teacher, to your family, to the people around, and he sent him. There was a reason for it. Even the journey that you've gone through, the continuous journey that you'll continue to do. I told you the other journeys that have happened in this whole time. I told you about Neil Donald Walsh saying, "How come you don't talk to me?" And he goes, "I do. You just don't listen."
Mm-hmm.
He sends messages all the time, whether it's through 1111 or something that happens, whether it's a ring or whatever it would be. God sent you to me. God sent Lisa to me. The students that I'm working sent to me. That award was sent is him saying, "I'm here. Why don't you trust me?" I'm still here. And what it is my big thing, and my wife, I drive her crazy over this. I don't believe in hope. And the reason I don't believe hope in the terms of the counseling term, I believe in hope when you don't have control over something.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have a client and they say, "I hope I can stop drinking. I hope I can do this," that means they're not ready. They're in pre-contemplation. I wish I could. I want them to go to, "I believe. I believe I'm going to, and I'm going to do it." Because if I believe, I'm going to do the actions to make that change that needs to take place. So I'm always telling her, I'm like, I don't believe in hope because I believe in believe. I believe I can do this. I believe I can continue to do what I'm doing. I believe in you, and that's what I look at. If I continue to say, I hope things at Adams State gets better, they're not. I hope the world's going to get better. It's probably not. Yet that's always a hope. I believe it's going to get better. I believe I can be the person that's going to make that little piece a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I look at this piece. So you ask me, how am I able to continue to do it? It's because I believe, and I believe in you. I believe in what I do. I believe I can still teach. Um, but what it comes down to the end of the day, you saved me. Lisa saved me. And the names just keep going on that saved me. Um, because I know Adams State's going to be Adams State.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Also, I don't know. Yeah, 100%. Is that where we should leave it? Any other thoughts?
I think that's a great place.
I think it is too. It's been an honor and a privilege. Mark, thank you
The same,
for
same here.
everything.
Absolutely.
Before we end, I want to share a poem I wrote while I was teaching one of the intensives at Adams State during my PhD program. One of my students used an analogy of whitewater rafting for the group counseling we were doing. Later that night, I wrote this. It will be included in the second book on counseling I'm currently working on, called Under the Waterline. The first poetry book of counseling poems is available on Amazon and called To Leap Off the Dock. The River Guide. We were all in this together, climbing into the raft, looking out at the river in front of us, wondering where its ebbs and flows and bends and breaks will take us. Clinging to my life jacket as I settled into the bottom, the water lapping at the underside of the raft, rhythm against my feet, every part of me wanting to climb back out and flee. I know that this river is filled with rapids, white water high as tidal waves, rocks that might rip us to pieces. I don't. Instead, I choose to trust as our river guide takes us out into the current. Left, right, keeping time as the current takes us on. He's calm, speaking of the river of life, the bends and breaks, guilt and shame and loss. This is a process group, he says, as the current picks up faster, spinning us around a long corner and out of sight. But I've had so much pain, I want to tell him. I don't know how to swim. I don't think I can do this. His voice is calm as he guides the group forward. What else, he says. I saw a lot of heads nodding. Janet shares about her divorce, the ugly custody battle, and the little ones torn between them. Left, right, our river guide tells us, paddle, paddle, and we do. Martin talks about his long battle with cancer, finally coming out on the other side, but still never really knowing. Can I tell them, I wonder? What will they say? What will they think of me? I've hidden all of this for so long, but the current carries us forward, now together and bonded in our uncertainty. Up and around the corner, he warns us, are the first real rapids, and I can see them, towering waves and jagged rocks. Left, right, he tells us. Dig, he tells us. Guiding the raft from the rear. Who haven't we heard from, he asks, his eyes fixing on me. I feel so exposed. The current is so strong. I tell them. The words come out of me without my knowing, without my wanting them to. In froth and fury, in agony and courage. The boat nearly tosses me. The water nearly claims me. I want to scream as we're ripped forward. The current softens. The river releases me. The storm quiets, and I look around. I find them all, their eyes holding me, seeing me. Our river guide is silent, his head bowed in reverence. The sun is soft on our shoulders. The river finally quiet and calm, drifting on, completely together. Thank you for listening to the Pay Love Forward podcast. If this conversation moved you, inspired you, or made you think, don't let it stop there. Pay Love Forward is more than a podcast. It's a movement, a community, and a way of being. At its heart is a simple commitment to invest in others in ways that multiply. In partnership with the Center for Mentoring, Coaching, and Leadership Development, we're committed to hearing the story within the story, the deeper narrative of courage, compassion, and renewal that reminds us who we are as a moral people. If you'd like to walk with us, find a mentor, find a mentee, and join us for one of our community gatherings. You can connect through our Facebook group or visit www.payloveforward.net to learn more. Let's keep building something beautiful together.